And in that regard, I find it interesting when other established vendors start talking about AI to a greater degree. So of course, we've been talking about OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, Microsoft, and they've all been doing a lot of interesting things in AI. But when the older companies start coming into AI and start having some sort of governance compliance that makes sense, that always is important from a practical perspective now as well. And it looks like Apple is starting to come into this, come into the game, come into the theater to a greater extent in actually trying to define what responsible AI means, as well as putting out its own 3 billion parameter model, which, models are models, but Apple probably has a better chance of actually building a small model that becomes extremely popular than everyone else, just because of what they do from an ecosystem perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you're an enterprise leader, it's hard to look at Apple and obviously they play a role because a lot of your knowledge workers are going to have Apple products, but they're not generally considered a major enterprise player in the normal way. But I think what they do, there's a couple of things that I think that are significant about what they're doing. First of all, even the way they're approaching this announcement. So they made the announcement of Apple Intelligence, and now they're starting to. And there were some early releases, if people were following it, and with patent offices and stuff, where they're releasing like research. But now they're starting to trickle out before this is officially out yet, and they're starting to explain and peel back the covers on what they're doing. And so we're getting greater levels of exposure to their approach. And the first level at that level, what we're seeing is they are providing more than just lip service. They're truly attempting to find this balance. And they're in a very unique position because they control so much of our contextual data for those of us that are in the Apple ecosystem. Because, I mean, if I think of Apple, right, I literally, my entire world, at least my online world, revolves around three devices: my MacBook, my iPad, and my iPhone. So they have literal access to all of that to provide the sort of contextual layer that they can apply AI to. But that creepy factor, that line is really, really deep, right? They have to demonstrate that they're doing this in a way that doesn't violate my sense of trust and privacy. And that is a very challenging thing for them to do. But if and as they nail that, because I believe they're going to, it's going to reset the standard for the enterprise, because us same knowledge workers that have these devices, much like the iPhone changed our perception of how we expected to interact with our technology in the office, this is going to change our perspective of how we interact with AI in the office. And to your point, the reality is that the vast majority of people, even tech savvy knowledge workers, still have at best dabbled with AI. They're not you and me. They're not people that are using this on a daily basis. And so I think Apple's release of this has the potential to really change that. The one thing that may hold it back is, at least right now, the word is that it's only going to be available on their newest phones, and so that may hold it back a bit. But I think this is going to be impactful. I think it's going to cause a bit of a reckoning for CIOs, that it's going to cause a very dramatic shift in expectations.
I'm curious how Apple will actually be supporting AI in the long run, as Apple always ends up setting standards to such an extent that it becomes taken for granted. And I think a lot of people look at Apple and say, well, they don't innovate anymore. When I feel like what they're actually doing is they are creating new ecosystem standards that become so assumed as normal standards that we take it for granted that some of these things that we are looking at and just using are only a year or two old, and we feel like we've been doing it forever just because Apple includes it so seamlessly into what people have been doing in the past. And even when they have products that I would say are not market leaders or haven't completely caught on, people don't doubt the quality of what they do for the most part. Say with something like an Apple TV, you might not love their content, might not be the most popular content overall, but everybody looks at their shows and says, hey, they're doing a decent job and we know how to buy it on our phone, etc. You could look across their entire portfolio, kind of with the exception of Siri. So I hope that Siri gets a bit of an upgrade as Apple starts figuring out AI to a greater extent.
Like Apple's definitely not perfect. I think they have plenty of misses. I think their big thing, and frankly, they've never, maybe not never, but not for a very long time have they been a true innovator. What they've always, people kind of bash the term fast follower, mostly because they translate that to mean like copycat. But
Hmm.
Apple is the definition of the ultimate fast follower. But because what they do isn't the bleeding edge. They wait for something to be basically proven in the market, and then they refine it and make it so elegant that people actually adopt it. That to help it cross that transom into the, I forgot what the term is now, right? But where you get this broad acceptance, right? And that's the real genius, and that's what I think they have the potential of doing with AI, particularly within the enterprise context of truly changing that. I mean, going all the way back to the story about the CIO, I mean, I've used the Microsoft versions of this, and um, you know, it doesn't surprise me that they ran into that. And but I also think it's as much a challenge with a lack of imagination, and the fact that in order to truly see these benefits, you have to sort of break the paradigms of how we've historically worked. And and I think that's what Apple has the potential of truly changing here. And what's interesting, if you watch some of the Microsoft ads, they clearly understand this, right? They get, like, if you watch how people interact with the AI in their ads, in the videos that they have, you see people are, that is a representative of a change in paradigm. What I think is the gap is that when it gets deployed into production someplace right now, it's just a little glowing button and no one's training people on how to do it. We're not actually driving that organizational change aspect of it. And I think that's the real issue. And what I think Apple's brilliance has always been is they almost, I wish I could figure out how to bottle it, but it's like they end up creating an interface that is so intuitive that it drives organizational change itself, that people intrinsically sort of understand how to use it, and that leads them to doing things differently. And that's been their brilliance. And if they can pull that off with AI, and what I've seen so far leads me to think that they will, and I do think it's going to be driven by a much improved Siri, thank goodness. I think it can have, it may have a dramatic impact.
Yes, uh, I can buy that. I do wonder how much we will be able to understand what Apple is doing from an AI perspective, as we've talked about responsible AI, ethical AI, having visibility to models, and Apple tends to be pretty opaque about how they do things. They like to be a black box for a bunch of reasons. One of it, the most important ones from a governance perspective, is if you give too much information, it becomes a security risk and it becomes easier to hack into. And Apple obviously doesn't want that. But at the same time, they've got to find that balance right now of how to provide trusted AI services, but at the same time, you're dealing with everything from the hype makers like OpenAI, as well as the open source solutions that are coming out of the likes of Meta and others. So there's a lot of balancing to do.
No doubt, no doubt. I think it's still early days, and they're clearly not the only one, obviously playing, and not even the only one playing at a consumer level. I mean, clearly Meta has theirs, and I know I'm starting to find some value. Interesting. So LinkedIn, right, a Microsoft company, uh, one, I'm pretty sure it's theirs, that I'm finding that they're now providing summaries of like threads, and I'm finding that
Mhm.
super useful. So I mean, I think we're going to see it, it's certainly not just Apple, right? We're going to see a lot of this in our sort of everyday lives, sort of popping up, and it's going to start reprogramming our brain of how we think things should operate. And but I do think just because of Apple's position and their ubiquity, and to your point, the closed nature of their ecosystem, in which they can, because they have so much control, they can drive so much more change. I think it's going to, it will be very impactful around it. But